finally here. You finally arrived. You've at last found the one place which holds the answers to the questions of the ages. You're excited. Your heart palpitates. Is it real? Can it be true? You're understandably hesitant, yet determinedly hopeful. That is good. Your faith in such matters will be rewarded. You'll not find pat and cliched answers here. No! Here is a place of clarity, of definition, of explanation, of truth. Here combines science and religion, removes tradition and replaces it with fact. Here the universe is holographic, yet tangible, ethereal, yet substantive. Here is a place where time is understood as atemporal. Here there is harmony amidst chaos. Here is where the darkened glass is finally cleared. Here is where you'll find the answers to all the unanswered questions which stretch across the cosmos.
And you are across the cosmos for the next hour. I am Chase Rockwell, and I am your host. I am joined in studio once again by my co-hosts,
Lou Rogers, Mark Wilson.
We resume where we left off last time on the subject of heaven. Why is heaven so exclusionary? Why would a God of creation speak to us so often about a destination out of reach to so many of his creation? It seems a conundrum. It seems an incongruity. A God who describes himself as love, but sets the bar so high that very few of his creation will ever reside with him in this magical kingdom that has been described by orthodoxy. Or have we gotten the message wrong from the very beginning? Have we, as human beings, anthropomorphized Creator God Almighty to such a point where we have distilled him and diminished him to what we are, which are petty, singularly selfish entities? Well, God isn't a human being, and I hate to break this to you, but that's a fact. If one believes in God at all, one must be willing to accept the fact that whatever this entity is, he is not human. So when we impute human attributes upon him, we do him as well as ourselves a disservice, because that's not how he's going to react. And he has said as much. The flesh, which is what human beings are, we are spirits encased in a fleshly container that has needs a spiritual being would not have. It motivates us to do things that we otherwise would not need to do in the spirit. The flesh wants what the flesh wants. The spirit is directed towards other things. And this is a theme replete throughout the New Testament, not the Old. Let's be clear here, not the Old. There is a line of demarcation, and a student of the Scriptures will clearly see that. One who has been inculcated, inured with orthodox teaching, is not going to see it, because such people do not want to see it. So they will remain locked into this orthodox thought with respect to the God of the Old Testament, this raging justice tempered by the loving, ethereal figure of Christ. Well, Christ said that he is God. The God of the Old Testament said that he is the same today, yesterday, and forever. Which one do you therefore believe? They can't be both, because the God of the Old Testament, the God of, if you were to look up Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 10 through 20 specifically, and were to read the actions of that God, the commands of that God towards his people, and then marry those actions with what you find Paul writing about the character of God in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. Look them up. Compare them. Do a side-by-side comparison. If you can find a way to marry both of those beings in some sort of harmony that doesn't necessitate you rewriting Scripture, that would be a neat trick. So heaven, is it for all, Or is it just for a few? Can a God who is eternal, therefore atemporal, not tell the future, not see who would be worthy, quote unquote, than others? Well, again, orthodoxy rears its head, and unfortunately our church leaders have spent too much time learning the administration aspect of their job than to actually learn the truth of their ministry, their reason for their calling to begin with. Anybody can run a business. I hate to put it to you, but that's true. We have business schools all over the place. And from my personal observation, and to a degree experience, I have not seen too many church pastors do well at business administration. They try, but the whole construct of their business, and I use that term directly, business, is different than somebody who makes something or sells a service. Christ never sold his services. Christ freely gave. He was a selfless servant. Heaven. Heaven is our home. If you are taking breath into your lungs now, if you are self-aware, if you are a person, a human being, heaven is where you started, and heaven is where you will wind up. Now, will there be people here that will argue vociferously against what I have just said? Of course. Why? Because people are people, and people don't like it when you step on their toes. But the simple fact of the matter remains is that if you are eternal, and we are called eternal, then that means that you pre-existed your time here on this planet, in this temporal bubble. You may not like that. You may think that I'm being too simplistic, that I am not really understanding the scriptures, that I've not applied the hermeneutic rules. And I would say that you're absolutely 100%, if not more, in error. But that's me. So, let us pick up where we left off last time. Speaking on, can God use horrible, horrific, just abjectly bad circumstances that people find themselves in, sometimes by their own hand, oftentimes through no fault of their own? They are victims of genocide. They are victims of a small, little dictator someplace who will wipe out millions of people, tens of millions of people, to somehow validate his own existence. Can God use those situations to mature us as individuals? Absolutely. I do believe that, but let's pick up where we left off in this discussion. My whole point in pointing this, in addressing the situation with the maturing process is because, I don't think that human beings really understand the point of being here on this planet. We're here for a brief time. It's hammered into our brains that what we do on this earth, on this plane of existence, will have eternal consequences. Well, excuse me, but unless I've been given all the information up front, why are you going to hold me accountable for crap that I don't know?
Again,
and that's where you start getting into this whole justice system.
Human beings put tremendous pressure on other human beings to perform in a certain way, saying that they are the mouthpiece of God, saying they're interpreting the scriptures, whether it be the Christian scriptures or other scriptures.
Well, then aren't we doing the exact same thing?
Are we?
Yeah. We're interpreting scripture in a way that's counter to a lot of orthodox interpretations.
In a way to condemn others?
No. To a degree, people believe that we're leading others astray, and that will condemn them. So. I've been called a heretic so many times, I should just change my name.
It's to me, I've been called a heretic enough. I don't even. What? You didn't call me a heretic? I almost feel offended if they don't call me.
What we have is most people that are in religious organizations will bank so heavily on their writings, on the early writings, whether it be a Muslim, whether it be a Jew, whether it be a Christian.
How early? because a lot of them have a line of demarcation that starts right around 325, 330 AD. They don't like to go back before then because it doesn't fit their narrative.
Right. They'll rely so heavily on those writings that they'll bank everything on them as opposed to everything else that's around them. They won't think things through very quickly. So, for instance, when it says that at the end there's going to be a book opened and there's going to be a sea of people in front of Jesus, and if you're not in the book of life, you're cast into the lake of fire, which was prepared for the devil and his angels. And so you take that literally, the sea of humanity would have to be, we're talking at least 15 billion souls.
Talking a whole lot of people.
Yeah, and at least, it could be twice that number. We don't know how many people lived in the antediluvian period, etc. So we don't know how many people have been alive. So it'd really be hard to
a lot more than 15 billion.
I sure hope they got chairs in the waiting line because I don't want to be standing up the whole time.
That's part of the deal, you gotta wait. Or when they say that there's, the souls that were in the Great Tribulation that were slain, they're underneath this. God opens this lid, and they're sitting underneath there, in torment, crying, "How long, O Lord? How long?" Before you avenge us and take care of things. What a terrible place to be. They're stuck there. So we believe it. We don't think twice. We believe it. And
where does that whole idea come from? I mean, that's a description of Sheol before Christ's return.
That's a good proposition.
When you look at it, when we go through like the book of Enoch and it discusses what's going on in Sheol, and the righteous are crying out, avenge this death.
Yeah, so before we get to heaven, it seems to be there's a criteria in order to get there, and that's what we're discussing right now. I've heard so many literalist interpretations by some of the supposed more enlightened minds of our past 2 centuries regarding the book of Revelation, and I have to say they're all wrong. That I'm not saying put me in a position above them. I'm just saying, as I look at it, they're all wrong.
Well, they're wrong primarily because they date the book of Revelation 30 years past
poorly
when it was actually written.
Right. So you'll find a person that will study the book of Revelation over and over and over, then cross-reference the Old Testament verses, and think that if they get back to the original Greek and original Hebrew and spend literally years researching the stuff, that they're going to have a better handle on what the book's all about. Well, that's untrue because their framework, their foundation they stand upon to begin with is they believe that John lived to a ripe old age, which I also agree, but they believe he wrote the Revelation somewhere around 90 AD.
96 AD.
Which is
the
an
last year of the reign of Domitian.
And complete misunderstanding of the text.
Exactly.
If anyone reads the book of Revelation, they'll see the sacrifices are still going on. The sacrifices stopped in 68 AD.
Okay, but again, do you remember when you said earlier they were going to rely on the earlier writings? And I said up to a point because they key in on Eusebius of Caesarea, who was a mouthpiece, a shill, a propagandist for Constantine the Great after the beginning of the Nicene Councils. And it was his charge to go around and start gathering up this information to help them put together some sort of a theology under the new Catholic universal church, if you will. Okay, Eusebius pulled his information from an earlier church father named Irenaeus, who lived about 100 and some odd years before him. Okay, he wrote Against Heresies, a 5-volume work, and whereupon he took the responsibility of pointing out the inherent dangers of listening to the Gnostics, who were essentially a disinformation campaign. They weren't necessarily in league with one another, but it was just the thing. If you could write a paper, if you could discover a letter, you were elevated in society because now all of a sudden you're a rock star. Hey, I got this letter written by Paul, or I got this letter written by Peter or Thomas, etc. Fill in the blank. And you can write whatever you want. And they would be disseminated in much the same way the earlier letters were written, and they would gain all sorts of fame, just like the American Idol today.
Pretty much.
You go out there, you warble a song, and you get your 15 minutes of fame, as Andy Warhol had pointed out. Well, it was no different back then. The problem is that when that age of Gnostics kind of started to fade out by the time of Constantine, you had all this crap floating around. And Eusebius tried to, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to assume that he tried to go through it because he went to Irenaeus, who was regarded in his time as something of an authority. But again, limited people, an agenda already being driven. Give us what we need to know. Well, Eusebius is the one that dated the writing of the Revelation to the last year of the reign of Domitian because of something
It took
that
a long
Irenaeus,
time to get there.
Well, because I need to get people to understand. Don't come to me with Eusebius when Eusebius is quoting somebody
The
earlier.
average person out there and the average pulpit pastor has no clue who Eusebius is.
Well, then they shouldn't be behind the
It's
pulpit.
just that they haven't really read the book of Revelation. It's funny how they study it, but they haven't read it. If they understand history...
Well, let me make it clear. The
they
book of
understand
Revelation
what
was most likely written 64, 65, maybe 66 A.D. Nero was still on the throne. 666 is a gematria. It was a very well-known alphanumeric code, widely used, and it means Nero Caesar, period.
Blasphemer!
You know when Paul wrote about the Thessalonian church,
There is your mark of the beast.
and he explained that the dead in Christ won't be preceded by the living. In other words, hey, don't worry, they're going to rise first, because they were questioning, because Jesus has been away for so long, and they're waiting, and they're seeing people die. The same thing happened with John. See, we put John in this position where he's like in this weird state. But John was the leader of a certain amount of
You mean
churches.
he just didn't accidentally eat some mushrooms and...
Right. Well, he's a leader of a certain amount of churches. And the letter went out to the 7 churches they called in Asia. But if you look where they're right around Greece and backward into the... around that area.
They circle the Mediterranean Sea.
Right.
But none of them is Rome.
But, right. So what happened was in 64 A.D., for those of you out there, is that Nero burned... Are we still on?
Yeah.
For those of you out there, the Mediterranean Sea was the center of civilization at the time.
The Hellenistic world.
Right, so Nero decided to do some architectural, but he had to burn down Rome, or where a lot of people were living first. And he didn't want to get the masses against him, but he got this bug in his rear end that he wanted...
describe Rome at that point in time. It was like England back before their Great Fire.
Right,
there was
a lot
a
of
slum.
Yes, it was. There's a huge slum area. So it
was like Rio today. When
Right,
you
so
get away from the resort area.
He had it torched, and a lot of people that day lost their lives and their businesses, and they were angry. And so what he did was he blamed it on the Christians.
Well, he understood one thing, that the public is a mob. And as long as you can keep the mob focused on something other than the problem.
And so the Christians were already considered kind of weird because there were some weird things heard about them. They were stubborn. They believed they were monotheistic. And the Jews hated them.
And everybody kind of knew one or two of them.
And they heard about this blood. They drank the blood because of, Christ.
Right.
My body and my blood I give for you, the communion.
They're cannibals.
So they decided to blame it on the Christians, which made the Jews kind of happy until they found out that Christians and Jews were all lumped together. And a lot of Jews were crucified along the way to Rome as well as Christians. And so that really hurt. So John is writing that letter right after this time. There's a huge uprising against Christianity. A lot of them lost their homes, property. They went broke. They were poor.
Especially in Rome.
In Rome.
Yeah.
And that's why there's no letter to Rome, because this letter is capping on all of the other Christian communities that aren't doing a damn thing.
Now, people don't realize John was written too. He just didn't write this letter out of the blue. What's happening? Is the end near? Everyone thought the end was near. See, because you must understand, Rome had not yet invaded Jerusalem. That happened in 68 A.D. So in 64 A.D., there was this great persecution. The Jews were torqued at the Christians, and so they were confiscating all their land and collecting all the bucks. But also both Christians and some Jews were being crucified. And so they thought it was the end of the world. So John writes, no, this is what's going to happen. And so he explains through the book of Revelation to the Christians alive at that time along the Mediterranean what's going on. So it's written in a way that they really can't trace it back to Rome, because that would mean a death sentence if they were to speak against Rome in that way.
Well, especially if you were caught with the letter, taking it from one town to another.
Sure. So this is what happens, and it's not speaking about some future date. Now, it could very well, like the mountaintops of prophecy, be speaking about a future date such as today, as well as back then. But it was most definitely to encourage them back then, and the souls that were being killed through this persecution back then. They had to live through this horror.
The book of Revelation was not written to us in 2015. It was written to those in 060? 4?
So here's the problem: is that
4 or 5?
Yeah, when you start
somewhere in that area,
disseminating or just dissecting rather the book of Revelation, the learned clergy today, I agree, they have no clue what they're talking about. You proceed upon a false premise, you're going to wind up with a flawed conclusion, no matter how studious you want to believe that you're being. So there's the problem.
Oh, you raise lots of... Cephalo Dollar just recently asked $300 from each one of his congregants.
Creflo Dollar, yes, asked for
$300 a pop.
$300 from 200,000 of his followers worldwide.
And that would give him...
He was trying to raise $65 million for a G650.
Well, I'll be a son of a bitch.
What's a G650?
It's the top of the line private jet.
So he wants a private jet, just like one of your favorite guys. What's that guy's name?
Kenneth Copeland.
Copeland's got himself a $50,000 or $55,000 million. Excuse me,
He's got a
$55 million
$50,000 jet. I don't think I'd be flying.
I wouldn't get in it.
$55 million because he's got to get.
Yeah, let me tell you something. You just have that crank there on the front.
So a lot of it is to raise money. It's always been that way. Hell has been a place to raise money, and heaven's been a place to raise money.
Creflo Dollar and his wife, whose name is Taffy. Creflo and Taffy Dollar. Holy hell. Okay, are two of the biggest hucksters in this game. Okay, they're prosperity gospel. And I was listening to a passage. Essentially, if you give them money, the adage is that God can't use the money if it doesn't go through you. So by you giving money to the church, you're going to get some money too.
And let me tell you something about me believing God. I can dream as long as I want to. I can believe God as long as I want to. If I want to believe God for a $65 million plane, you cannot stop me. You cannot stop me from dreaming. You can't stop me from dreaming. I'm going to dream until Jesus comes. And here's another thing I want you to understand. That if they discover life on Mars, if you think a $65 million plane was too much, if they discover that there's life on Mars, they're going to need to hear the gospel, and I'm going to have to believe God for $1 billion space shuttle because we got to preach the gospel on Mars.
It's almost like Amway.
It is a Amway scenario. I think Amway got the idea from it.
So how do we get to heaven?
Is
it like Hercules that has to perform all these feats of heroism in order to achieve it?
The question of, we look at things like, what does the Muslim faith look at heaven? How do the Jews look at heaven? And Christians are a little bit different than the rest.
I don't even know that I want to bring Islam into this conversation because I spent most of, when you're doing study, you have one little rabbit trail will lead you someplace. I wound up reading large passages of the Ayatollah Khomeini's what's called the Little Green Book. And essentially what it is that back when he was still in exile in France, starting around 1964 or so, he began to write the outline of what would become essentially Islamic jurisprudence. And he collected them all together in this book. It's about 20 different sections, which is now regarded as the Little Green Book. And it covers everything. This is where he gives you license to thigh infants, for example. And if you don't know what thighing is, it's essentially having your way sexually with a little baby without penetrating them.
Okay, you didn't need to say that.
No, I do need to say that because when you are dealing with Islam, you need to understand where these people are coming from. Now, another practice that is Iranian through the Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, is that a virgin cannot go to hell.
No. They can't.
Doesn't matter what the offense is. If they are a virgin, they cannot go to hell. So what they do when they find that a girl, and in most cases these are little girls, 12, 13 years old, sometimes even younger, committed an offense that is capital offense in nature, in order to ensure that when they're hung from a derrick till they're dead, they don't ascend to heaven, they rape them before their execution. And the only way you can do that without falling afoul of the Quran is you need to marry them. So what they do is they will have the executioner marry the condemned and rape them the night before their execution. Therefore, they're no longer a virgin. The marriages, of course, are nullified when they're dead because, till death do you part.
That's just ignorance.
That's not ignorance.
It's ignorance.
Evil. Evil, 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 evil. And this is who Barack Obama is right now trying to get into bed with his nuclear treaty. Okay, so when you're talking about heaven and you're going to bring up Islam, I don't think so.
Well,
because
what is their view
these
of
people
heaven?
are spun. These are sand people.
Let's go with.
They're easily startled.
Let's go, but come back.
But they will come back in greater numbers.
The sand people are easily startled, but they'll soon be back, and in greater numbers.
Well, let's look at the Jewish. What's the Jewish heaven like? Because
the Jewish heaven is more, from the best that I've been able to. It's a broad spectrum, but essentially it's almost
another world.
Well, you become one with God, and you lose your autonomy.
So
they're very much rooted in the here and now.
Very much. So
they're not too dissimilar from Buddhism in that respect.
You join the great cosmic.
And while it's a pleasurable place, your autonomy having been gone, you cease to be this person who you were.
Right.
And again, that's why I think it screwed around with them so much with the Holocaust and the earlier persecutions they went through. And I'm aware that there's different schools of thought with respect to Judaism. Mm-hmm. But now this is an answer as to why you've got Israel today is largely an atheistic country.
Wouldn't you be after you?
Well, it's your view of God. And I know that they were looking for a Messiah who was going to be more like a Moses, who would come in and...
Yeah, they've been looking for him since Babylon.
Well, yeah, and in that time... But in that time, the first century, they wanted the Messiah to come in and get rid of Rome.
Right.
Just like Moses had come in and gotten them out of Pharaoh, in Egypt.
They
when Christ comes and he's this wraith-like figure who just kind of, turn the other cheek and don't get in their face, and your kingdom is going to be over there. Well, hell, their whole understanding of the afterlife was that there really wasn't any over there, because everything is supposed to be about here and pleasing God here. And so when he came and said, "My kingdom isn't of this world, and there are many mansions in heaven. Don't you know that I've come to prepare a place for you?" They're looking at him like, the guy's on drugs. He's a crack addict. Kill him, get rid of him. And so they did.
Pretty much.
So that brings us today, and you've got this just absolutely obscene bastardization called Islam, and playing fast and loose. I mean, life is meaningless
their whole
to
idea,
these people.
Their whole idea of paradise, from what I've researched, they call it paradise.
You're talking about Muslims.
Muslim is you're okay if you're a male.
Not always. You can catch God on a bad day.
Well,
if you die and you catch God on a bad day, sorry, Charlie, you're being flushed.
When all is pissed,
you've got to ensure that your the hereafter is locked in tight. And one of the ways they've convinced people to do that, though I cannot find
in the Quran,
I cannot find in my Quran any legitimate, or not legitimate, hard, fast proof of this. But if you martyr yourself, it's not even in one of the hadiths. It's more like and they don't call them an encyclical. I forget the term they call them. But it's like one of the writings afterwards.
It's
where they codified certain aspects of, what can get you into heaven.
Allahu Akbar!
But blowing yourself up is not in here.
Here's a copy of the Christian martyrdom, but Christians were killed for their faith, not killing other people. Whereas in Islam, they kill others in jihad for their
so
faith.
they can assure that they will have a seat in heaven.
Which
because
is absolutely 180 degrees.
Well, no, but
here's
not
an
only that, but I
interesting view.
can't find it in the Quran.
Right.
And that is when we're talking about the idea of Muslim heaven, and some of this doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you understand.
And just so
the
you
Muslim
know,
faith.
I've got a copy of the Quran that I go through and highlight and study. It's not as though I'm pulling crap out of my ass. All right, I do my due diligence.
It says that the paradise, when we go to paradise, it's going to have rivers that flow with pure fresh water, pure fresh milk, pure fresh wine.
And why do I need any of those things if
Because
I am a
that's
spiritual
what they,
entity?
When it was written, that's what they
Now wait a
yearned
minute.
for at that time.
Let's hook up with one thing, and also honey.
I stick with the same people.
There's four
They're
rivers.
easily startled, but they will soon be back and in greater numbers.
There's four rivers. One has water that never goes bad. One has milk that never goes bad. One has honey that never goes bad. And it has wine that never goes bad.
Well, honey's not going to go bad.
You're forbidden in Islam to drink alcohol.
You're forbidden to engage in porn, too. But 20 hijackers all got drunk the night before they flew the planes into the Twin Towers, and they were visiting hookers. So,
My
I guess
point
they're
is,
already roasting.
if it's forbidden now, if you go to an Islam-controlled country, you cannot buy alcohol because it's not allowed in the country.
Unless you're one of the top guys.
But when you go to paradise, you've got wine. So what's not good now is good later.
It's an infantile religion, and that's why I didn't want to put it in this category.
I understand.
It just
My point was to draw out the fact that their view of heaven is very physical and very earth-like.
Oh, sure.
Right, it's based on what they don't have
Right.
now.
And
That's what atheists look at us, is that heaven is a place where all the wishes you have will come true.
That's because an atheist has not done an inch worth of homework.
no, they don't truly
They
understand
think that they're smarter than they truly are. A Dawkins book about drove me nuts. At first I was laughing at the fact that he's got to use as big a words as possible because it's like somebody with a small penis driving around in a huge truck. It's serious, honest to God. Okay, so Dawkins uses these big words to impress people who really don't care. If you can't convey your ideas using simple language so that your audience can understand you, who the hell are you impressing?
Well,
He's
it
trying to
adds
impress
in his
himself.
mind legitimacy to his arguments.
How so?
The bigger words you use means the more educated you are. And if he puts himself in a position where he's more educated than the next guy, he thinks that he wins.
But he comes off as a fool because whether or not you use large words, small words, etc., most people will be able to read through your ideology and see how
arrogance is
just
a vice.
infantile
like
it is.
Any
because
other vice.
it goes
Dawkins' entire premise was built upon Catholicism
it goes back to
and Old Testament theology.
it goes back to when I was in high school, and I used to walk around with a shirt that said quite simply,
Please don't make me have to bleep something. I'm trying to.
Why?
To
You
keep-
said some things got to be believed.
I know, but I'll take them out.
Okay.
I want this to be clean.
Yes.
To a degree.
It is quite simply, if you can't baffle them with your brilliance, dazzle them with your BS. And the more we can tie onto it, the more I can make myself sound learned.
So heaven,
intelligent,
we're talking
the
about
less
the
likely you're gonna argue.
qualifiers. We were talking about the qualifiers
Yes and no.
in a way.
Yeah,
and
good
who gets to go and who doesn't, and are the qualifications correct or are they not correct?
So
What's heaven like? What's it
do
truly
we have
like?
do we have streets of gold and gates made of pearl and precious stones?
There are those that say that we do.
Really, because
Based upon what?
Of what value?
I've never
The
found
Book of Revelation.
anything in the Bible that talks about pearly gates.
Precious stones.
Yeah, they're big gates of pearl. It's there.
It's there.
Where?
You're gonna have to edit that out.
No, not where. I've
Give me a
seen
minute.
all sorts of precious stones and everything. Where is St. Peter standing behind a pulpit, ushering people in through these pearly gates?
we get St. Peter from...
He was given the keys to the kingdom
right,
of heaven.
this,
So
this rock
He's-
I will
he-
build my church on.
So he stands watch What a suck-ass job.
Yeah, no one gets in and out of heaven but by him.
But
And
the
it's
vision was the gates were gigantic pearls.
everybody else is inside partying while he's outside going, damn it, should have kept my mouth shut.
But anyway,
No,
what is heaven like?
I guess I just don't think
See,
about
John was
the
writing.
absurdity of all of this.
John was writing to people at that time. For instance, gold was very precious.
Yes.
Moses took the people out of Israel,
Well,
and at that time, the pyramids were topped with gold. Gold was what wars were waged over. It was
Why
a
all the
very
pyramids
rare.
are stripped.
Yeah, and the Jerusalem temple, when it was torn down, gold was what they were after.
well, sure, they had to pay for the building of the Colosseum.
Right. So
And that was why it was set
So
on
when you
fire.
hear streets paved with gold, you've got to come from the mindset that was considered the ultimate in wealth. Today we talk more about diamonds because not only are diamonds the girl's best friend, but there are diamond mines around our world, especially in Africa.
And they're highly overpriced in the United
Yes,
States.
they are.
Holy hell.
But
I mean,
it's-
the De Beers have just done nothing.
It's
except-
billions of dollars in
except
business.
just scam the world.
Yeah, that's
There's so many
America.
diamonds, it must just be dirt.
Yeah, that's in America, the high price of diamonds is because we don't let the De Beers family sell diamonds here.
Right. So a lot of it is looking at what they would consider to be opulent and very wealthy is going to be common. That's why the streets will be paved with gold. Now, is it literally going to be a...
Really, and is gold valuable to God?
I guess I remember that now, but I never took it
Right.
literally.
Well, that's
Well,
where,
that's where
they
they yank it from. Yeah.
And
So Revelations 21:21,
pearls were
where there's a gate made of one pearl. That'd be a hell of a huge oyster.
oyster, right? Yeah, it's like... this is
One
allegory, and John's trying to encourage the people. And allegory was used in many ways, but it was a way to convey imagery.
Okay, but a pearl is made from sand or some other sort of grit getting into the oyster, and this is his way, or the oyster's way, of cushioning themselves against
It's
this
protected.
irritant.
because they can't get it out. They can't
And
spit it out.
it's like a gallstone
Right.
Pretty much.
or a kidney
It's
stone.
kind of brittle in some ways. So,
And it's
what
not
would be
very
the point?
strong, and it doesn't take well to.
Well, I mean, they're pretty,
A lot of cleaning.
They are
but
beautiful.
to the oyster, they're not.
Right.
To the oyster, yeah, it's like having a goiter.
A lot of it's allegory. But today people will look at it as a fact. This is what it's going to look like. We're going to walk on streets that are paved with gold. We're going to go through gates that are
They're
pearl.
missing the whole point. We're talking about
And we're going to be in a body in our young state that never grows weary, all our energy, jumping around all the time.
doing what?
Then we
I
eat
mean,
once a year from the tree of life,
Who's
and that sustains us forever.
Who's got to polish the streets of gold? I mean, come on, gold oxidizes. So we're going to have to be.
Gold lasts forever.
We're going to have to be out there polishing it and keeping it clean.
No, gold doesn't oxidize.
Oh yeah, it does.
Copper
gold-
does. Iron
Copper does, yeah. No, gold doesn't. Gold was thought to have
Silver
only come to
tarnishes,
Earth
but gold doesn't.
from
Gold will
meteors.
lose its luster.
A little bit, yeah.
That's an
That's
oxidation.
right. Gold coins, get
They
covered with crap.
they lose their they don't shine because they've oxidized. There's a coating.
You're right. They clean them.
So gold has to be cleaned.
But so what is heaven like beyond the simplicity of a human anthropomorphism of heaven? What's it all about?
Well, I know what it's not about.
Okay, we know it's not about that.
It's not about knocking on the table and killing me. Just killing me.
Sorry.
Just killing me. My thoughts with respect to heaven is that it's home. It's where we are in our natural state.
So we're not going
Loosed
to be
from the body.
We're not going to be like, let's take the Mormon view, where if you're really good and in the super good heaven, and God puts His arm around you, you go, you're so good here's your own little planet.
Right.
My
Their theology, they
feelings-
believe you get your own planet.
Okay.
I mean,
My
we're going to be
feelings
busy
are
doing something.
Not too dissimilar, to be quite frank. Okay, because if you're looking at this time here in this temporal plane
Right.
as a learning time, and I think that that's fair, because we all come through this learning something. Our goal is to be more like Christ. That's why we're called Christians. Even prior to Christ, there was a specific goal. If you look at the God of the Old Testament, if you look at Hillel, he wanted to have his people at least understand and have a reverence for God. You can make the argument that while he was charged with being the face of God to the human creation, and he failed, because that's essentially what Christ said that he did, the goal was still there. I mean, that was his point, to be the face of God to us. Now, that's our job to one another. So we're coming through this process where we're learning, where we're maturing. I firmly believe that since the time of Christ, we are supposed to mature even more to where we are almost peers. The training wheels are off. We don't have these restrictions. We're not, leashed to mommy and daddy anymore. We are supposed to take now what we've learned and walk forward in it, as a mature adult would. Well, why learn all of this if all we're going to be doing in heaven is sitting around at his feet singing songs? We could have done that without all having to go through all of this.
A lot of that's allegory.
So, my understanding, what I believe, what I think he's put us all through, because I don't regard God as a purposeless God. I believe that he's very purposeful, that we will be doing something with what it is we've learned. And if we're being raised to be more Christ-like, there might just be a reason for that. If the angels, if these spiritual entities of massive power, massive knowledge were charged with creating just this one habitable bubble in temporal time, could it be possible that his designs for us are along those same lines, but now, rather than us giving us all of this stuff up front, as he did with these celestial beings and these other lesser angels, we now go into the situation with this knowledge learned through hard-won effort.
That's a possibility.
Because how many times have we, as just people, not just Christians, but people, said, if I were God, I would do it differently. Right. We may get that opportunity.
We learn sympathy and empathy down here. We go through things. People say, why are we allowed to get old and rot and then die?
I've long believed that we had this whole aging thing backwards. We should start old and grow young.
But the process develops in us a tremendous amount of information that we could never get by reading a book or even observing it.
No,
to go through years of pain, to go through heartache, the loss of a spouse or a child, that type of feeling that you have to process while in these shells, and also to know that you live on the edge of, you could die at any moment. You're very vulnerable here. We live in these cases that are extremely prone to the elements around us. We can't go off this earth. We would die unless we're suited up in a specific way. We can't go underwater. We get cold so easily. We get hot so easily. We get sick so easily. And we get pain becomes your constant companion. The older you are, the more pain you feel. And it's relentless. And the pills like aspirin or ibuprofen, they don't work anymore. And so you find yourself constantly walking slower and hurting more. My heart goes out to so many people that are in pain constantly. So heaven, the one thing that you can know for certain is there is no pain that the physical body brings on.
Yeah, physical body isn't there.
Energy. You are now. All physical mass is energy.
Are we going to have the same style of body Christ has?
Well, people must understand that they look at things in a literal sense. Christ was given a body when he rose.
And when he rose again, he still had the same body.
Because he's interacting with what?
Man.
He's interacting with man, who was also in a body. So the idea of a bodily resurrection like Jesus Christ, and we're going to go to heaven and we're going to be in those kinds of bodies, no, that's not the way it is. When Christ appeared to John, who was his beloved, John didn't recognize him in the Revelation. He was shocked and afraid and frightened. He saw this incredibly powerful being with bronze skin and wearing a breastplate and hair with like white wool and eyes, red
bronze
flames.
Skin's idea is really that light is emanating from him.
Right, so John sees Jesus in a way that he never suspected. But it was the epitome of power, and there was fear in John when he first saw him. And this is the guy that used to put his head on the breast of Jesus and relax when they would talk. So to say that we're going to be in heaven like Jesus, that's not the way it is. When we get to heaven, first of all, the physical construct doesn't exist.
Agreed.
If there's reasons for that. There will be absolutely no limit of energy. So the idea of sleep, for instance, we have to sleep because our bodies require it. They're beautifully made. But they're units made out of pure energy collapsed down into physical matter. Every little cell in your body is an independent little dynamo that needs energy, and it will grow weary. Combined, they create the body in which which houses our consciousness, or our spirit, let's say. But it grows weary, and as it wears out by the laws designed in this realm, you feel great pain, great weariness. Some older people sleep most of the day. They can't get the energy they had when they were youth. A lot of people drink rock drinks and all these Red Bulls to try and get it back, but it don't work.
Yeah, especially when they're 25.
I remember as a high jumper, I could run out and I could play basketball at midnight, 6 a.m., 3 in the afternoon. I'd get tired, but I'd rejuvenate real fast. I'd be right back out there again.
Yeah,
I'd jump like crazy.
Football, we did daily doubles that were 2-3 hour practices a day.
I could hit my
middle of
chin
August
on a 10-foot basketball rim, and I'm only 6'2". I'm a white guy too, and I could do those kind of things. Now, if I try and jump, the pain is so excruciating, I can't get off the ground anymore. It's sad. Well, that's because the body is designed to wear out or have the appearance of wearing out, and pain, boy, is the pain there. But when we get to heaven, that's all gone. You have no sensation.
But heaven's more than just a pain-free place.
It's completely pain-free, number one. Completely energy.
When we did the NDEs, though, there was this overwhelming feeling of love, of place, of belonging, of purpose.
Right, when you're out of the body.
So why all of those things there?
Think about an insect. If you cut off the antenna, what happens?
Well,
it gets mad at you.
But all of a sudden they're cut off from the world. Those antennae do a lot. It senses air variations, vibrations. It does a lot for the insect. We're kind of like that in this realm. We've got 5 senses in which we sense the realm, but we're completely cut off from another human. That's why Jesus tells us to love one another. Why? Because it's very difficult to do. We cannot sense what they're feeling on the inside. We cannot sense if they're in pain or having a bad day. We can observe it. We can't feel it. So Christ is teaching us to be empathetic towards our fellow man, to love them at a place that's equal to ourselves. In heaven, that is a normal process.
Because the barrier is removed.
The barrier is removed. We're taking out of these containers, and we're freed from this kenosis that we're in. And we have tremendous love for others, and they have tremendous love for us. Now, someone might say it's a cotton candy view, but that's the truth. That's what it's going to be like. So limitless energy, no need for sleep, there is no pain, and you're able to experience another person in a way you never could down here.
So, question. When we're dealing with these spiritual entities, these like celestial entities or other angels, we see that there is different mindsets, I suppose is a good way to put towards it. Michael disputing with, of course, Satan regarding the body of Moses. Why would he be
much of a fight there?
Why would he be? But my point is, why would there be an argument at all if these are spiritual entities? They already have this boundary erased.
Because in Jude and in 2 Peter, those are the references used regarding don't slander celestial entities.
Exactly.
And both Peter and Jude go on to say that brute beasts, humans with no real thinking behind them, will rail against such beings, not understanding that we are below the angels on terra firma, the earth.
Exactly, because of where we are.
And then a reference is given regarding Jude, saying even Michael, who is more powerful than we are in this realm, would not dare bring a railing accusations against such a being, the devil, in the presence of the Lord, who's everywhere. But he says, may the Lord rebuke you while here on earth. Now in heaven, he kicked him out of heaven. If you look at it, Michael and his angels fought the dragon, the devil, and his angels, and prevailed and kicked him back down to earth. But while on the earth, Michael could not do that because of contractual obligations.
Covenantal. I think that the kicking down to earth occurred when Christ rested us from Sheol.
Correct.
I think that's when all that happened.
Correct.
I think that limited him. Heaven again.
Was that Revelation 12 or 14?
Heaven being this different construct. So now these celestial entities' world literally is this temporal plane.
Yes, this is their world. This is the world of who you would call the devil. That's just a term.
I get it, but I think it's misunderstood by most of the clergy.
Right.
Because they think that he's stuck on this actual planet. So
right.
When I was a little kid and they first launched Voyager, I was interested to see how far out it would go before it ceased to exist. And the reason being is because my theology at the time had taught me that the devil is limited to this place. And I understood by then it must also mean the moon, because we'd been to the moon. Uh-huh. Then we landed Viking on Mars, and I thought, well, okay, maybe it's just this solar system. So I was really interested when Voyager, because Voyager was going to leave the solar system. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, once it gets past the limits of our solar system, it's got to cease to exist, because then it will be in the presence of God, and it's man. This may sound stupid to people, but for me at the time, I was in my late teens. It was it was a mechanism by which God showed me what this temporal realm really is. Yeah. This entire universe, everything that we know of the universe, is theirs. They created it. It's theirs. Covenantal.
I don't go that far.
I know you don't go that far.
Nope.
But see, I don't see the universe as, no matter how big it is, as anything more than just a concept in God's mind.
I see him creating the universe most definitely, and I see him allowing through covenants, who we call the devil, this terra firma.
Just this planet?
No, probably other areas.
This galaxy?
We're not aware of it.
This quadrant?
I don't know.
Okay, I just...
Nobody knows, but I do know that he spoke it into existence.
Since he's everywhere, again, it's like me with my books. My characters, no matter how big their universe is, all exist in my mind. There's nowhere they can go to escape it, and it doesn't matter how big it is, it's all inside me.
A covenant is a contract in which there is a limit. It's a limitation as well as an obligation to both parties. But so it would encompass whatever they decided it would encompass.
I get that.
To say that it encompasses everything, I don't go that far.
I understand that. But what we think of as everything, I believe, is an anthropomorphizing of what we see. Mm-hmm. This temporal plane, to me, includes this entire universe. I get you don't. I get you're not on board with that. I see it that way because I think that it has been one of those things that have really thrown us for a loop. So when I saw Voyager leave the solar system, it opened up, and was still broadcasting, it opened up a whole new dynamic for me. And I started to look at things differently. And that, I think, was my very first step into really understanding that what was being taught to me was not true.
There's a lot. It's wonderful how we learn, and little moments that are important to us, how they affect us. Maybe not others, but it affected you to think in that way. That's how we all learn. But in regards to heaven, do we believe it's a real place? I definitely believe that heaven is real. There's not a question in my mind that heaven is real.
But
and
it's not just a physical place, it's a spiritual place.
Well, see, there's that
what
Christian word again. I just think it's a place that we can't understand with our...
It's a different construct.
Yeah, with our physics. Mm-hmm. You know, you might call it a different dimension, for instance.
Might be a different dimension. I mean, when we try to use scientific terms, even then we're limited.
Right, like when Jacob had his you can call it a dream, or you can call it a...
bad soup.
Whatever. He lays down, and he sees angels ascending and descending and ascending to heaven. They call it Jacob's ladder, and it's not like a little ladder. It was some kind of a staircase.
Escalator.
Escalator, yeah. But we realize that heaven is... We always used to think of heaven as out there. above the earth. When we were younger in our understanding on the earth, we thought that heaven was above
And
the
there are
earth.
still theologians who believe it is that way today.
Well, let's look at, they launched Sputnik. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik. They launched the first man to be in atmosphere. Hey, we've been in outer space. There's no God. We couldn't find heaven.
Right.
Yeah.
And we realize as we've grown as a human race that we understand the word heaven a little bit better. We know enough to know that we don't know what's going on. But there's certain places like angels appear and disappear. So do they teleport like in Star Trek, or do they go from one realm to the next, which I think is what's happening, is it's a realm to the next. And we don't know
they're opening up a portal and
what realms they're allowed to go
portal.
into. Spaceships follow that. People realize now that a lot of the UFOs seem to appear and disappear out of thin air, and so they believe they go to a different dimension or a different realm. A lot of times they're attached with the idea of being demonic or angelic entities, and they go from one realm to the next. Could be.
Could be, or it could be the Asgardians just...
But I do know heaven is a place.
Didn't that little walkway got broken up, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it did.
And I do know this, is that our Father is the controller and protector, the creator of all things, will be in his realm, designed for us,
Will we?
that we're a part of.
Yeah,
Now,
I don't have any doubt about
he can
that.
reside in a different part of this particular realm.
Well, I am bordering on the conclusion of heaven that we are not going to truly know our Father the way we think we will.
Well,
I think
I
he
will.
is...
Well, and that's why I asked you,
I think he is
where
going
we
to-
come into all knowledge, because that would mean that we would be on absolute par with God.
I think we're going to be looking at Christ, the avatar God chose to use, as our relationship to God the whole time. I don't think Christ is stepping out of the picture in the way we communicate with God.
Well,
I think he's still going to be...
It says that Jesus will sit at the right hand of the Father in heaven.
Right.
Now, it also says we will be where Jesus is. That's interesting.
But that's not a literal, he's going to pull up a chair.
Well-
because that'd suck. How long do I have to sit here next to you?
No.
Right.
And it describes...
Well, what if I'm the guy at the very end of the line? Yeah.
Our Father has been described as being... Because certain types of angels were allowed to stand in his presence.
Yes.
Others were not. Jesus definitely was. And John described him as an ineffable light.
Right.
And every time he's described, you see like a rainbow of different colors, and you can't ever see his face, so we don't know what he looks like.
Probably because he doesn't have one.
But I do know that however this works, a father always interacts with his children.
I'm not saying he's not going to interact with us. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that I believe Christ is going to be
Oh, the chick tracks. Those are funny.
Praise God.
Yes. I believe Christ is going to be our
Those are
our
wonderful
emissary,
little
our
tracks.
mediator, even into heaven.
Don't even.
When we want, as far as our communication with God Himself. I still think it's all going through Christ.
Well, and I considered that a lot too, and I'm still there with it. But just because of the way I understand the construct.
Exactly.
Will it be
And
that
as you-
way? I don't know.
Until he tells me otherwise, I know I'm going to be with my Father. That's just something I've always banked on all my life.
I get
Right,
that.
but here again, who's the Father? We all of us here, as far as I know, believe that God became flesh and dwelt among us.
Right.
And to the three of us, there's no separation between Jesus and God the Father. They're one and the same being.
As much as I've studied this, as much as I've looked at this from every different angle, reading every possible book on this subject I can, and as much as I look into my heart, my spirit, I have to admit, I don't know how it all works.
No, none
And I'm
of
going
us
to
do.
find out when I get there.
None of us do, and we're not
But
supposed to know.
it's my great hope,
We know how it doesn't
my
work.
anticipation that I will be with my Father, at least sometime.
Okay, but we know how it doesn't work. And we know that the crap that's shoveled by Islam is not correct.
No.
That this stunted, bunkered Baptist view of heaven is not the way it is.
No, they
No,
just don't understand.
They
That's
pull
okay.
so many verses out of context. That,
Well, they all see it through their lens of what they regard as truth or orthodoxy.
They
And
all
it
through-
seems that most of it is rooted in control.
it's all me. Even the ones that aren't in control, it's about me.
As I was
It's about
sharing
self.
with Dave, the term sola scriptura was first a Catholic term. It's Latin.
It's Latin.
But later it became the
Roman
rally
Vulgate.
cry of the protest movement, Protestant movement, because they were tired of listening to what the Pope said, who was the vicar of Christ on earth, supposedly, and they bypassed Scripture continually.
Well, because that's the whole point. He
They
can
believe-
speak for Christ and update
right.
crap.
So it was. So in other words, relationship with God was a fluid circumstance based upon what Pope was in office and what he conveyed to the masses.
Exactly.
Things would change continually. So per the Protestant movement, although they wanted to move away from the Catholic Church, they adopted a lot of the Catholic philosophy.
I would say they adopted most of it.
Yeah, most of it. But the one that they did get away from was the confessional and the Vicar of Christ,
the
as Pope.
papacy.
The papacy.
Because
They believed the papacy was Antichrist.
no, they believed more that it diluted. The sovereigns believed that the papacy diluted their sovereignty.
Right,
Okay,
so-
and so he had to go.
They felt very strongly that if you stuck to the Scriptures, at that time was the 66 books that were compiled together in the folio known as the Bible. If you stuck with those 66, then you wouldn't be too far off. And so anyone who deviated from that, they would basically call them a liar or an antichrist
Or a heretic.
or a heretic, right? And so they were real staunch about that. So when you come to Paul's writing, it says, "Who has known the mind of God? Who can know the mind of God?" And if you go down those verses, and I think it's 2 Corinthians, it talks about the mind of God, and we have the mind of Christ. He starts off by saying, "Eye has not seen nor ear has heard the things that God has prepared for those that love Him, for they're spiritually discerned." Then he goes on to explain, we have the mind of Christ, so it's no longer a question. So when you say, what's heaven like?
But the mind of Christ and what I would assume or what I would define as aggregate knowledge, I think, are two different things. You can have the mind of Christ because we emulate his attributes.
We also have, in Philippians, as Paul said, we're sealed with the Holy Spirit until the day of redemption. So in other words, Paul was trying to tell the church of Philippi, he was putting it in this way, like a Roman seal. He was saying, you are sealed until the day you are redeemed, so you don't have to worry.
Sure.
It's a done
Because
deal.
they were worried about the salvation issue.
Yeah, can you lose your salvation?
That's going on in a lot of the churches in the last 100 years, which is terrible, actually 200 years, the idea you can lose your salvation. And he says, no, you're sealed by whom? By the Holy Spirit. Until when? Until the day you're redeemed. By whom? By God Himself.
Sure.
Right.
So in other words, no one can break that seal. No one has the power or the authority to break the seal except God Himself.
And who again, I feel like we're circling back
We are.
to where we started. So I suppose we need to wrap this up.
Yeah.
I guess to conclude, yeah, I think we're all agreement here that heaven is a real place or
Most definitely.
a real construct.
It exists, but it doesn't exist in this physical plane.
I would say heaven is more real than what we consider to be real here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you consider the fact that you're, as an eternal being, time ceases to have meaning. We're stuck in a linear time frame. And, Max Planck was able to bust it down into Planck's time, and I forget what the smallest segment
Planck
of time.
lengths,
But
Lengths
once
and
those
time,
are
yeah.
lost,
Those
they're
are
never
changed.
replicated.
Planck
the waves.
measurements is
You
what they're
can,
called.
people listening to this podcast will be listening to what we recorded in some future date, but the actual moment that we're doing all this is here, but for a brief instant, and it's gone. And there's just a bunch of those running together like a frame, a film.
Yeah, time is a misnomer because, as we were discussing before the show, the only thing we have is now.
Right.
Now only exists.
And
Past doesn't
exists
exist.
briefly.
Yeah, past doesn't exist. Future doesn't exist. Neither one of those are real.
We can
The
relate
only
to
thing
them
that's
as
real is
reference
this instant.
points only. But the truth is that you live in an ever-present now.
Well, actually, you live in a past because if you look at Planck's time, for example,
Yeah, right.
I'm responding to stuff that has already happened. So
It's over and done with.
I am responding to the past,
But it's your
constantly.
now. It's your now.
But it's my now,
Yeah.
and so
It's like when you look in the mirror,
I'm
people
seeing
don't realize
something
this.
of the past.
When you look in the mirror, you're seeing your image in the past.
Who you were, not what you are.
Yeah. You can never see yourself in the now. It's
And
impossible
so-
because light photons take time to hit the mirror, bounce back to your
Sure.
retinas.
And then your brain has to process
Yes.
all of it, which takes even more time. So
And the older you get, the more time it
we
takes.
struggle with this because it's so familiar to us. It's all we know. No, I'm well acquainted with the fact that heaven is home, and I know that it's home is because that's where we started. And much like we all remember, fond,
Oh,
you know, we have fond memories of things from our childhood.
So it's just about home time. Dad's calling you home.
Yeah, I mean, and home holds a special place because it's where things were right. It's where security was. And I get that there's lots of people on this planet who've never experienced that. Their childhoods were just a horror.
and they're still homesick, too.
But they still get homesick. Yeah, that's the irony. So heaven is home, and we're going to be returning home because that's where we came from. So this notion that is propagated by so many different religions that it's only for the select few, that God's extraordinarily exclusionary, and we've got to walk this little tightrope in order to arrive there. These are people who are either A, just so monumentally ignorant, I don't know how they manage to be able to get up in the morning, dress and feed themselves to go to work or do whatever they do, or they're just outright deceiving and evil. And how, my question is still to this day, while I subscribe to the notion that we will all be there, and I'm talking about heaven, I don't know how it's all going to be sorted out. So it's like Duke Nukem, let God sort it out.
Well, you know,
Because
about
I have
Clint
no,
Eastwood said it.
I have no clue.
for me, the whole concept of the idea of only a select few are making it to heaven was we're talking about the creator of all things coming in second place in a contest.
Well, that's a Greco-Roman concept, and people don't realize it. Why do you think Hercules had to go through the labors and create these scenarios in which he was victorious over the lion of wherever?
Well, you really want to know?
So he can become a god.
No, he did it to obtain forgiveness for killing his wife and 2 kids.
Right, but the whole idea that we look at today is that you do these heroic deeds so you can achieve godhood. It's the Christians latched onto that in a way, and if you live a heroic life, if you do great deeds, look at the Jehovah's Witness Church. Now they have Jobadites, but in the old days, they said there was 144,000.
Oh, did they change?
And
now you don't have to worry about bumping the guy that's at 144,000?
Right, so when they were a young congregation, 144,000 was quite large. So
Kind of like computer memory back in the old days.
Right.
I've got a 5 megabyte hard drive. I'll never fill that.
That's for
well,
sure.
it's like, they believed that those that did good works would go to heaven. But what happened was the church exceeded 144,000, which meant that some people weren't going to make it in their own church. And
Well,
when they exceeded 1 million, they were in big trouble.
What it meant is you had to be better than everybody else, so you're always bumping the last guy in line.
So it's kind of like you lived 100 years ago and you were 137, and now in this day and age, there's 10 different people that got knocked up.
Yeah,
you're bumped down like you missed.
You're at 140. You're 144.9. You're out of here, buddy. Boom.
So it's like, but heaven's not like that at all. It's not based upon your deeds. It's based upon who you are and what Christ did to take care of the contractual obligation in which you found yourself pinned under. But even still, we were eternal beings always.
Were we pinned under it from the start, or does this go back to the whole premise
There's a
of
dilemma that we're still
original
trying to
sin?
figure out. But I do know heaven is an incredible place. The realization of dreams in a way that we try and transfer humanistic desires into a heavenly realm. Like, wow, I can finally do this or that.
So we're not going to be sitting on clouds, floating around, eating bonbons.
Well, for instance, as you grow older,
Playing a
you
harp.
dream of resting in front of a beach and watching the sunset and all those kinds of things. Why?
I dream of that now.
A little kid,
Wouldn't.
you try and put him on a bench or seat, he'd go crazy. He's got to get up and run around and play in the waves and
Right.
play in the sand. Well, when we get to heaven, we are energy. There's no weariness whatsoever.
So we get to play in the sand?
We can play in sand.
Or do we get to become the sand?
Maybe both. All right, we need to wrap this up.
Okay.
So for
Lou Rogers?
Mark Wilson.
I am Chase Rockwell saying so long until the next time you find yourself across the cosmos.
Send any questions or comments to us via email at info@acrossthecosmos.com. Also, visit us on the web at www.acrossthecosmos.com for show updates, news, and other important information. No part of this podcast may be used without the express written permission from the staff of Across the Cosmos. Across the Cosmos is a production of Omite Corporation. Copyright 2015.